the Germans are coming. But back in the 1800s, the Germans had really noticed our American Revolution. They had taken note, and they thought that was a good idea in some parts of Europe. Napoleon Bonaparte. And he had gone to war with a lot of countries over there, which also was what prompted the Louisiana Purchase and a brand new part of America. He was in war against France. The young men were being drafted to fight, and Germany itself knew that it had a problem, because these young men that were going away to fight, just like the Hessian soldiers in the Revolutionary War, they really didn't want to fight this war, because they really liked that democracy that was going on in other places. So Germany got the idea, and so they made a bunch of promises, the kings and the rulers and princes and that, and they said, well, you defeat Napoleon, and then afterwards we'll be a stronger Germany, and we'll give you all those liberties. And then they broke their promises. So about that time, there had been a lot of uprisings. And the uprisings were sometimes fueled by this gentleman, Frederick Ludwig Jahn. We all know the gymnasium in our schools today. This is the earliest movement of the turn drawing. He had founded that, and its promotion was for a strong mind in a strong body. And he promoted that, saying that if all of our youth were such, and we were united, like you promised, then we would really have a very strong country, and we wouldn't be constantly going to war. The government didn't like the message he was giving, and he had to flee because they said he was being revolutionary and subversive, and he was. Also, the university students, as in so many places, our youth are the first ones to really get involved and have these new ideas, and they were promoting in their little fraternities. Some of them had some strange names, like the Giessen Blacks. They were promoting a lot of subversive movement, trying to uprise and trying to create uprisings that would create a united Germany. You got to keep in mind that in Germany, at that time period, is not the Germany that we know today. It was a country the size of Missouri and half of Illinois, just as it is today, with about 117 different dukedoms and principalities and kingdoms and all kinds of things going on. So in these fraternities, there were things like Carl Fullen, who had started the Giessen Blacks, and he was suggesting, he had a plan, and he had a backup plan. And part of his plan was the different uprisings, and the young students, they really took him at his word, and there was some assassinations, and he too had to flee. But he had written a plan before he left about creating a place in this new United States that could be a refuge for people like himself. About this same time, who here has never heard of Gottfried Juden? One of the most famous Germans, especially in this area. Gottfried Juden, I'm sorry, Judy, I'm going to step aside for just a second to get a book. He came to Missouri. It was his idea to write a book, an immigration book. Everybody was writing them at that time. And he came to Missouri from 1824 to 1827. And he wrote this book that a lot of people said were some glowing reports about America. In turn, these glowing reports caused a lot of Germans to think of coming to America. I want to read you one or two of these, and you tell me how glowing you think these are, or if these just sound just like us anyhow. I cannot describe the impression that the days of wandering in this river valley have made upon me. One can travel hundreds of miles between gigantic tree trunks without a single ray of sunlight falling upon one's head. The soil is so black here from the plant mold that has been accumulating since primeval days that one seems to be walking on a coal bed. I have seen grapevines whose trunks, over a foot thick, rise up about 100 feet, free as cables, and then spread out in a crown of elms with their heavy foliaged vines. There are several kinds of grapevines here, and some hills are so densely covered by them that wagon loads of grapes can be gathered in a short time. Now, we all know how the Germans like their wine. And today is a beautiful day, and I really appreciate you all staying inside here with me because it is beautiful out there. But I can't imagine walking in a forest so thick that you cannot see the sun because the trees are so old. Some of the other things that Duden wrote about was the executive power of the Union is vested in a president who is elected by all the states. Wow, there's a novel theory. Most of all, he said, if several people could travel together, and if a significant group could immigrate, then the founding of a little town could bring great advantages because the surrounding country would thus immediately gain considerably in value. So that gave him quite often the reputation for being the greatest land promoter. For whatever reason you could say that he wrote his books, one of the most important was that he recommended at the beginning that groups travel in safety. He wrote about Missouri, and he did accomplish what he set out to do. These are the things that when they came here that they found. Amazing. These were the things that made him, the Missouri, where the sun of freedom shines, considered a dream spinner. There was freedom of speech, something they didn't have in Germany. It was a land of opportunity. There was so much land. We just purchased the Louisiana Territory. You could raise a family. The food is plentiful. Some of the Germans said they ate more meat in 1 month than they did in a year in Germany. Plus, they can have a democratic election. They don't have a king. And they have religious freedoms. There's no taxes. There's no military mandate. And they can be as Germans as they want still in the United States. So, about 1833, these two young men from the Giessen University, fellow brothers, by this time brother-in-laws, had come upon Duden's book that had just been published, and Mitch himself was very, very attracted to its theories. And he is working hard to convince his friend Paul Flinius to immigrate with him. And finally, one more time, an uprising fails, and Flinius agrees. Flinius is the dreamer of the group, and he is the one that says, only if this can be done on a grand scale. So, they write a book, a little pamphlet, a little bit smaller than Duden's, and it's called A Call for Immigration. I have copies too, in English and in German here. And in this little book, they lay out the ideas and the guidelines for what they'd like to do and how they would like to form an immigration society. And in this society, they will plan to buy land communally and begin the nucleus for what is to be a German state in America. Thousands apply. Thousands want to follow them. This book has been secretly passed after church from home to home and family to family. If you were caught, you could have been in big trouble for suggesting immigration. They hold a small meeting in the town of Friedberg, and they organize further, and they're elected presidents of the society. And agents are sent off to Arkansas to investigate land in the United States. This is about the time I like to say anything that can go wrong did. Flinius he is in Bremen, and he is about to depart with his group. One of the members of his group is a Dr. Philip Albert Pulte. And in this group, it's an amusing thing because he is important to me for one reason. I've been quite often told that the group that came from Warstein and Bühleca and some of those areas did not come with the Giessen Society. And finally, one day I asked a German researcher that I work with, "Why do you say that, Heinz?" And he says, "Oh, you enticed our poor farmers farmers, even Pulte. Pulte was a poor farmer. Well, I did a little research. Not only had they advertised they were leaving, there was nothing subversive. They were not mandated to. In fact, some of them, their passage through was paid by fellow Albert Pulte. But Dr. Philip Albert Pulte, his father had had a great clinic in Bonn, Germany. But his father had passed away, and this is a time when young men are looking westward to the new expanding horizons in America. And he actually decides to join the Giessen Society, and he is the one who brings the Varstein and the Bielica families into the fold. He does some pretty great things later on, too. Well, about this same time as Valenius is about to leave, Schmidt and Mueller show back up from Arkansas. And they go, you don't want to go to Arkansas. It's rocky. It's not suitable for grape growing. So Valenius sends back a message to Mensch, who's still back in Niedergemünden. And I like to say he had to be the first one to say this, but he actually does send the message, meet me in St. Louis. To add to the problem of Valenius' ship, before they even reach the British Isles, typhoid has broke out on the ship. Imagine yourself caught with your dream to go to America, and daily people are dying of typhoid. 74 passengers, we think, passed away on that voyage. As they reached American shores, they were headed for New Orleans, and as they reached there, they got word that there's cholera in New Orleans. And this is terrible. They're going from one crisis to another, and they're heading into New Orleans. Valenius has lost his son. They reach New Orleans. The cholera epidemic is so bad, they head up the Mississippi. Valenius himself grows so ill, they think he is near death. And they break open the coffers in the treasury, and it's dispersed. Mensch reaches Bremen. There's no ship. This is quite astounding. Remember, at this time of the immigration period, these are the earliest, and there's not a lot of services in Bremen and the ports. They're not only going to a land that is wide open and primitive and, the far western frontier with no cabins, but they are also leaving from a country that the policy of immigration has just begun. And there's no services there. The ship owners literally tell them, go back home. And Mensch says, go home. We've sold everything. We have nothing to call home. Our home now is to be America. And they're headed there. They're caught and they're forced in a bad situation, and they need their money for their ship, and they need their funds for the new homes in America. So what they do then at that point is arrange to stay on a deserted island with only a house barn for 5 weeks. And they live on this, and the morale gets so low at times, and Mensch gives such enlightening and uplifting speeches that at one point they're inspired to raise the American flag on the barn on that island. They live on the island of Harrier's Inn for 5 weeks before they're able to chart a ship called the Medora. Here in Missouri, Valenius has bought the farm that Godfrey Duden had lived on all of that time. Mensch, he is coming across from Baltimore, and he actually encounters a German in Cincinnati. Now, the word has reached Missouri about the shipwreck. Remember the ship that didn't show up? So in Missouri, they think their friends in Germany are lost. And Mensch in Cincinnati encounters a German named Bach. And he tells them the story. Oh, you must be from the other part of the Giessen Society. And they have reached Missouri, and they have settled near me. But they've also broke up and splintered. So the problem is Mensch is just devastated. He arrives in St. Charles. First in St. Louis, but the cholera is so bad that they come straight over to St. Charles. And he sends word out to Judzow, where Bach has lived and where Valenius is now at, to please send someone and show us the way. And Philetus comes himself. It probably was at the mill down at Blanchette Creek. Between 1834 and 1837, 30,000 Germans came to Missouri. 7,000 of those settled in the St. Louis area, but 23,000 more headed westward along the Boone's Lake Trail. And one of the earliest places that they reached was the St. Charles County. A lot of the Giessen Society members had settled here as well. In St. Paul, there's the Aarons, Freemouth, Shawnee, Stahlschmidts, Mollitors, and more. George Mattis founds Hamburg. Hickory Flats is Jonathan Kunze. And Cottleville has Franz Hillenkamp. Churches and schools and stores are the first things to be settled and created. Franz Hillenkamp wrote some letters home that you can find in the St. Charles County archives. And I thought I'd share a few words straight from Franz Hillenkamp on the St. Charles County archives. In St. Charles, Franz Hillenkamp writes to his cousin and his friend Schulte back in Germany. I have never been sorry that I came here, as you have been told so falsely. That thought has not even occurred to me in my wildest dreams, much less in my awakened moments. What could I have possibly lost through immigrating? What did I gain here? Well, right now, I just want to tell you that I am very satisfied. I have a good piece of property, no debt, a good wife, 4 blooming children, lots of cattle of any kind, food in abundance, and above all, I am free and an independent man who is subject to none except for God and the law. I converted a forest of about 20 morgan into farmland. I can tell you that since then I've been here these 9 years, I have cut down more trees than any one of your coal makers. However, with regard to religion, he goes on to talk about, it is different. The old women in Valmini would bless themselves with the sign of the cross if they knew that I would never go to church. He'd been Catholic in Germany. That during Lent, I eat meat 3 times a day, and that my children are not baptized, and yet in the end enter the same heaven as all those who follow the ministers scrupulously. He also writes, but enough of this. I am in a free country, and you, my friend, are in an unfree country. Here one may say his opinion freely and openly, but you have to keep quiet. Otherwise, you could run the danger like thousands of innocent people who have been sentenced and burned at the stake. He writes several letters, just as a lot of the Germans did to their friends and their family back home. Should you have a chance to go to Varstein, please give your regards to the relatives of my wife. Later on, a few years later, he writes more letters. These are all at the St. Charles County Archives, and they're very, very interesting and enlightening. The blacksmith shop is in Hamburg, Mount Pleasant, has part of the Minch family. That's Grandma Mattis there on the bottom right, and the Lutheran German ministry that helps the orphans and the wives. A lot of the benevolence societies were founded in those early years. In the St. Charles College with Arnold Krekel. Arnold Krekel's wife was a member of the Giessen Society. That's Freemouth and Stahlschmidt. Okay. So Philetus, who was never a farmer, did not succeed as a farmer. So he goes to St. Louis and starts a newspaper. He wasn't very good at that either. And by 1844, with the Great Flood, he had come back to Dutzel and unfortunately died then of typhoid. Minch felt that he must carry on the movement and the call for immigration, and he carries on and writes under the pseudonym Far West anytime he writes political. By 1854, the 48ers have arrived, more of them, caught up in the 48 Revolution, have arrived from Germany. Mitch continues to write on immigration and slavery, on winemaking, on the agriculture, politics. By this time, in some places of Missouri, the foreign-born population is about to be equal or exceed the native-born population. In 1859, Mitch is asked by the state of Missouri to write a book about the immigration to Missouri, talking about Missouri. A lot of people seem to think that his book was better than Newton's. It went through 3 editions. It's funded by the Agricultural Society, and he made a rapid trip through Germany to promote that in '59. He was watched constantly. He was very fearful for his life and afraid that for some reason he'd be held up in Germany and not allowed to return home. But at that point he began to enter politics, and he actually started to make speeches nationwide. By 1861, remember those turnarounds earlier? Well, they've come to America too, and they're networking. The Americans hate the Germans because they can't understand what they're saying. They know that they're plotting something, and they were. They plot in their turnarounds and their societies and their social clubs on Sunday afternoons, and they drill, and all that drilling was so great because the arsenal in St. Louis, when it could have been taken for the Confederates, the German troops helped. And out of those 3,000 troops that were at the St. Louis arsenal to hold it for the Union, only 600 of those soldiers were not German. What would this country be if the Union had not won? Mitch has threats against his family and his life and is about to be burned out, but he still persists, and he's elected a state senator from St. Charles, Montgomery and Warren counties too. By 1864, 30 years later, Missouri's become a more German state. It's definitely more German in some places than it even is American. And Mitch's book has 2 more editions. 150 years later, in 2004, there was a German scriptwriter who had about 40 years ago, about the same time I had started researching some of this because of some ancestry and genealogy, a gentleman named Henry Schneider had mentioned to his friend Peter Roloff, "Have you ever heard, since you grew up and you were born in Bremen, have you ever heard of the Giessen Emigration Society?" Peter said no, but he was very intrigued. And as Germans like to do, they gathered together to study the subject and to study this topic and to investigate further, which they did. On the Harrier Sand Island, the same island that Mitch had been caught up with in Germany on the Weser River between Bremen and Bremerhaven. In 2009, by this time for about 5 years, they've been doing this regularly in the summer. And they have this plan, and they want to know. So they send an email. I was one of those that received the email in 2009 asking, "Is there anything of German that is left in Missouri?" I thought it was spam, and I thought, gee, this is the strangest spam I've ever had. And I took a chance and I answered it. And I said, "Yes, of course there is." And I said, "Why don't you come see for yourself?" And they did. Peter Roloff, Volker Winkelmann, Rolf Schneider, and Monica Kieswetter. They came to Missouri, and there's Penny Pittman and Chick Reether and a lot of the Americans that are friends, and we're at the farm where Paul Felinius had bought that Godfrey Dutton had lived at. And we're standing there on a beautiful day just like today. We went many places in those 4 days. They got about 6 hours of sleep each night, tops. And we visited St. Louis and St. Charles and Jutzel and Washington and Herman. This picture was taken on the first day. It was October in 2009, and it was a beautiful day, just like today. I had just driven into Herman, and I was asked to stop the car very suddenly by a photographer in the back seat. I just met this group, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And promptly, 2 people jumped out of the back seat of the car, and then a third. And then later, I found this picture, and that's Rolf Schmidt, who's just walking back from the statue of Herman in Herman, Missouri. Some of the places that we visited were the Missouri Historical Society's Library and Research Center. We visited the St. Charles County Historical Society, and we encountered some previous research of some of the people that are descended from this group, and the entire visit was filmed. I rapidly learned when you're around Peter Roloff, you soon forget that he has a camera, but he is filming the entire time. And with this film, he turns it into a documentary called A Trip to a Forgotten Utopia. Now, that trip in 2010, I was invited to Germany to see the premiere of that film. And I was so amazed because hundreds of people turned out to see it as well in Germany. Imagine yourself traveling to Germany and finding everybody there interested in you and where you live here, just as we are the Germans there with our home places. So we began to have the idea, what could we do with all this information? And this story was big, and it was getting bigger all the time, and there was so much interest in it. So Peter Roloff began looking for funding, which came from the Ministry of Culture, City of Giessen, and some other partners that became involved, the German American History Museum and the Missouri History Museum itself. The documentary, A Trip to Forgotten Utopia, had an even larger audience in Germany, and then it was shown in Missouri, and then also the audience grew. We published a book, the Utopia book I have with me today. I have the wrong price on it. I thought it was $27, but it is some places. And in November 1st, a year ago, in Giessen, Germany, right where the Giessen Emigration Society started, 1 year ago, November 1st, the exhibit of Utopia, Revisiting a German State in America, was born. It was a wonderful fall day, and hundreds and thousands turned out. It started in Giessen, and then after several months, it traveled. It traveled then to Bremen. In Bremen, it was the St. Stephanus Church in Bremen, and then it departed for the United States, just as the original immigrants did. Then, on September 6th of this year, it opened at the German American Heritage Museum in Washington, D.C. Today, it's closing. This afternoon, as we speak, they have a concert and some closing programs, and this will be the last place it'll be in the United States until it comes to St. Louis. It'll open at the November 22nd at the Missouri History Museum. The exhibit is in German, and it is in English, and it's free. And it has a lot more than this brief story that I've been able to share with you today. That's why the book is 352 pages with 252 pictures. And it will be at the Missouri History Museum until April 19th. It has a lot of programs that go with it about the German heritage as well. And it'll be a great stay. I invite you all down. Okay. On November 23rd, a new documentary has been made of all of this past 5 years and the story, and it's part of the St. Louis International Film Festival. And it will be shown one time on November 23rd at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at the Missouri History Museum, and it's free, and I invite everyone to come down and see that as well. So these are some informational sites for anybody who's interested in more information. And that's a little bit about the Germans in the Utopia project.